Hi everyone, and welcome back to Musings with a video that I've been meaning to actually do for a little while now, and it wasn't until today that I was kind of finally inspired, shall we say, to actually sit down and do this. It's concerning the subject of gatekeeping, which in this context relates to TV and film fandom, and in particular Star Trek, although I will be touching upon some Star Wars related issues of this as well. Now, for those of you who don't know what the context is here, gatekeeping is best described as when one group of fans decides they're going to decide for everyone else what does or does not count as a part of the franchise, and who qualifies as actually being a fan of that franchise. In respect of the first one, I've encountered this a few times regarding the new Star Trek series, Star Trek Discovery. And the issue around that has really been, is Discovery, first of all, is it canon? Is it part of the continuity of the story? And if it is, which timeline does it belong to? Now, the official statements on Discovery are very clear. Star Trek Discovery is intended to be a prequel set 10 years prior to the events of the original series, and it is set in the original or prime timeline, as it's known. And as far as I'm concerned, that really should be the end of it. That's the official statement on the subject by the producers of the show. It's up to them to decide these things, and so be it. That's it. Decision done. This apparently is not good enough for some fans who, for whatever reason, don't like Discovery. And I'm not saying you have to like Discovery. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. That's fine. But for some people out there, the Discovery status, if you like, of it being canon is a major affront to them. And it's not enough for them to say, I don't like Discovery, I'm not going to watch it. They are attempting to have their personal opinion on the subject turned into some kind of fact or law. And if you don't subscribe to that theory, then you're apparently not a true fan. And some of these people are very clever. They don't come out and say you're not really a fan. They will say that Discovery is not really Star Trek for whatever given reason. And they'll employ various sort of nitpicky ideas behind this, or they'll attack the fact that Discovery is very different visually from the original series, and sort of hide behind that almost as an excuse for why Discovery doesn't count. And for me, that's where I take issue. You may or may not have seen, and I suggest you perhaps look up the hashtag in question on Twitter. There's one out there called True Trek, all one word. I'll put it in the description for the video as well. And that's kind of the philosophy that I'm opposing here, because what exactly is true Trek? Is there a set definition of this for everyone else to follow? Well, in the eyes of the fans who are acting as gatekeepers, if you like, yes, there is. And from their perspective, it's, you follow my rules or you're not a fan. And to me, that's kind of quite an elitist, exclusionary, arrogant and snobbish approach. You don't like Discovery, fine. No one has to like it. No one has to like any given aspect of the Star Trek franchise. But it doesn't mean that your personal opinion is suddenly elevated above anyone else's personal opinion. If you don't regard Discovery as being part of the story of Star Trek, that's fine. But that doesn't mean it's a law that everyone else suddenly has to subscribe to. Just because you take issue with certain details doesn't mean Discovery doesn't count. So, bottom line is, get over it. Unless you're a producer of the show or you work for the studio that makes the show, then it's not down for you to decide anything. And you just have to like it or lump it. Simple as. You get on with it. You get on with your life and you don't make life difficult for other fans. But unfortunately, there are people out there who have taken this attitude that it's their way or the highway. And this True Trek idea it's very close to this idea of, you're a true fan or you're not a true fan. You're not a true fan if you don't follow my beliefs almost, shall we say. And of course that reminds me of this idea of, true faith, as it were. Because it's the same mentality. Take out the word Trek and swap it for Christianity or Islam. It's exactly the same thought process. If you do not follow my way, then you are not a true believer. You are not part of that true faith. It's fanaticism, effectively. And that's all there is to it. And it's quite, I don't know, when you think about what Star Trek is, and you think about the ideals of Star Trek, and its history as being an inclusive, progressive show that really was there for everyone. It's been made to have broad appeal, to tackle the human condition, and to explore, yes, a very idealised view of the future. It's not there to then suddenly be partitioned along ideas of, true faith and true franchise and all that kind of rubbish. If you don't like Discovery, fine. Like I've said, you don't have to. However, it's not for any individual person to decide whether anyone else can like Discovery, and more to the point, whether or not Discovery actually counts. And these little games that people have played, it's really just, as I said, it's snobbish arrogance, and they don't have the conviction or the courage to sort of stand by what they're really doing. So they're coming up with all kinds of double speak and all these nitpicks, and they're unable to accept the idea of a stylistic change to the show. And it's just, to be honest, it's petty. And it's the sort of thing which, in my view, is poisonous to the franchise. They're trying to argue that Discovery is poisonous to the franchise. No, Discovery isn't poisonous to the franchise. The attitude that you have towards the show is poisonous to the franchise. It's the way in which you're treating fans who do like the show. That's poisonous. Simply, if you don't like it, don't watch it. And you leave it at that. Why it needs to be enough to go on these epic rants that I've seen, I don't know. So that's one side, one version of this gatekeeping idea. And the other one that I actually encountered, funny enough, earlier on today, relates to whether or not you've seen the original series. Now, for the record, I personally have, and yes, I enjoyed it, and I still do enjoy it. If I catch an episode on TV, I'll quite happily sit and watch it. It's over 50 years old now, yep, but you know what? It's still good. It still holds up, and the stories are still relevant today. I think that's fair to say. But there will be some fans of Star Trek whose first experience of Star Trek might have been, say for example, Voyager, or Enterprise, or Discovery, or the 2009 alternate universe films and their sequels. For them, they may never have watched the original series for whatever given reason. Who knows why? But that's fine. Then suddenly, they're not suddenly not fans if they haven't seen the original series. Again, that's a really arrogant perspective to have in my book. Again, it's quite elitist, it's quite snobbish, it's quite exclusionary, and it kind of goes against the grain of the ideals and values of the Star Trek franchise. So I would say if you're a Star Trek fan and you haven't seen the original series, don't worry about it, okay? It doesn't matter. It's up to you. If you want to go back and watch it at some point, fine, feel free to do so. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. If you don't, that's also fine. But it's not up to any other fan to tell you how you enjoy Star Trek or whether or not you get to call yourself a Trekkie. I don't buy into that kind of rubbish. I've been to Star Trek conventions, and one of the things about them that was really important and meaningful to me is how you had so many different age groups and so many different backgrounds, and they were all there because they appreciated some aspect of Star Trek. But there's no set rule that says you have to like all of it, or that you have to like the original series. None whatsoever. Moving on from Star Trek, just briefly, I've encountered the similar phenomenon, as you were, in the Star Wars fandom, and in relation to, in particular, The Last Jedi, which, as you are probably aware, came out last year in December, and it's now out on Blu-ray. And one of the things about The Last Jedi is it did polarize opinions on various sort of Star Wars message boards and things like that. My personal view is it was quite brave in some ways. It took the Star Wars story in an unexpected direction. The Force Awakens was in a lot of ways very much a homage to A New Hope in terms of its story and structure. There's no getting around that. It was a good film, an entertaining film. I thoroughly enjoyed The Force Awakens, but there's no denying what they were doing there. It was effectively a retake on A New Hope, a modern version of A New Hope. Now, the temptation would have been to do the same thing again with The Last Jedi. And you kind of wondered from the trailers when you had scenes of great big lumbering walkers like you did in Empire Strikes Back, would The Last Jedi be kind of copying The Empire Strikes Back? But they didn't. They went off on a different tangent, and they changed a few things from what we may have expected, which I, for one, think was a very brave decision. It wouldn't be to everyone's liking, and again, that's fine. There's no compulsion to like The Last Jedi, but at the end of the day, they've done things differently, and I think that's fine. I think that's quite bold, quite brave, and I actually applaud them for it. One of the things to bear in mind, and one of the things, if you haven't seen the film, is I would probably stop listening right about now. One of the things to bear in mind is some characters are not treated as you expect, and some characters, things don't pan out in the way that perhaps people were thinking they would. So, for example, in the case of Rey, in the first film, there was kind of a hint as to some important parentage, perhaps. After all, Rey being quite strong in the Force makes you think, is she related to the Skywalker family? Is she related to the Kenobi family? And one of the things that The Last Jedi does is it takes this idea and it kind of flips it on its head and says, no, she isn't. She's her own person, and she's defined by being her own person. One of the things that the director says, Rian Johnson says in the behind the scenes stuff, is that he deliberately wanted to set up this idea whereby Rey finds out that her parents were effectively nobodies, because then all of a sudden she has to stop defining herself by who she thinks she is and define herself by who she actually is and find her own unique path. And so she's pushed out of this comfort zone and kind of forced to re-examine herself through new eyes almost. And Johnson actually said this was a deliberate counterpoint to The Empire Strikes Back, whereby Luke set out believing that he was simply some farm boy, and all of a sudden discovers that he's got ties to one of the most powerful and notorious men in the entire galaxy. So for Rey, that situation's been flipped on its head. And I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. If everything revolves around the Skywalkers, then, how do you actually break away from that in the end? Eventually you've got to try and be a bit more imaginative and creative, and I'm pretty glad that they didn't tie her in to these expectations and preconceptions. And, for some fans, this has been a real issue. They don't like the fact that Rey is kind of identifying herself by her own merits. They want her to be connected to someone else. But the reality is, Rey, now, part of the character is she has to find a way to stand and grow as her own person and find her own worth and define herself by her own achievements. And in the end, isn't that something that we all aspire to do? The main issue, however, for some Star Wars fans is with Luke Skywalker and the fact that he wasn't like he was sort of post Return of the Jedi. He didn't have the same sort of swashbuckling, throw himself into danger for his friends attitude that he carried in the original trilogy. When we meet Luke in The Last Jedi, he is quite bitter, quite jaded. He is carrying a lot of pain from his past, and he genuinely believes that his actions have made things worse, and he no longer wants to be associated with that, with his past, with the Jedi, with the Force. From his perspective, all those things have, in the end, brought him pain. They have brought other people pain, and he doesn't want to go through that again. And people are complaining about this as though they've unfairly changed the way Luke is. The bottom line is, why would anyone be exactly the same person after 30 years of different experiences, especially experiences like the ones Luke had? It's a romantic bit of idealism to hope that we'd all still carry the same attitudes and behaviours in our 50s and 60s as we did in our 20s and 30s. But the reality is, life will change us. And in the case of Luke, with the experiences that he had, which were quite grim, quite painful, I don't think it's fair to expect him to be exactly the same person. I think he has every right to feel tired. He has every right to feel jaded. Now, in the end, he does make the decision to help his friends, but that's part of his journey and his growth through the course of the film. Rediscovering, part of who he was, but having originally had, in my view, every right to feel differently. If we were put in his shoes, if we were put through the things that he got put through, how many of us would actually feel like, or even do, the same that he did? I think a lot of us, if we were being honest, would want to sort of withdraw. We'd want to move away from those things. We'd be carrying a lot of guilt, a lot of heartache, and we'd be thinking to ourselves, you know what? No, I don't want to go down the road again. If you repeatedly burn yourself doing the same thing, eventually you're going to stop doing it, and you're going to withdraw from that thing. And that's normal. That's to be human. So for the people that think Luke somehow shouldn't be a human being and shouldn't be allowed to be a human being, I would say, again, you're being ridiculous, if you ask me, to be blunt. And I just don't understand it. I don't understand this almost angry attitude. I mean, some people feel that their childhood's been betrayed. At the end of the day, these new films, yes, they do want to tap into the existing Star Wars fan base, but by the same token, they're aiming these films at new generations. These are new stories for for a new generation of young fans. I mean, my daughter, who's going to be 8 soon, she loves Rey and she loves Finn and she loves Poe, and these new characters, they have really sort of resonated with her. The old characters, perhaps not quite so much, because this is her experience now, and that's fine. You know, I think there's enough in there to please the original fans, but by the same token, if we'd had a rehash of The Empire Strikes Back, I imagine we'd have a lot of these fans moaning. So it really is a case of, you know, damned if you do and damned if you don't, as far as the producers and directors go with these new films. They apparently can't do anything right, and they might as well just do what they want anyway in that regard, and just write what they feel is the best story for the circumstances. It's what I would do. I would just think, you know what, sod it. I'm going to write a story that I want to write, in conjunction with other people, of course, and try and make the best story that I can for the circumstances of the characters and the setting. And you just go with that. Anyway, that's kind of the end, as it were, for now, of this little gatekeeping issue. And yeah, just, you know, in respect to both Star Trek and Star Wars, this, you know, you're not a true fan unless you do this, or you're not a true fan if you like this, or you're not a true fan unless you've watched this. Don't let anyone define for you what your fandom means to you, or what it is, or define for you whether you're a fan or not. And this goes beyond Star Trek and Star Wars. This covers pretty much anything and everything, from sports teams to soap operas to music to any walk of life, really. At the end of the day, it's what you make of it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise.